Well, welcome to officially our week number 1. It is finally here. We're working to get all these kind of kinks worked out. So hopefully you should see, of course, the full PowerPoint presentation. I love talking to PowerPoints, not for the fact of just PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, but at least it keeps me on the right track, So seeing that, I want to honor your time tonight, 1 hour, and we've got, 56 minutes left. I want to be able to get through the material. Now, hopefully everybody has either gotten through Kindle, or you've been able to get the book. The reason I have my book is not just to say, okay, I want you to read my book. I do. But I think that the reason I put the book together the way it is really to give you and I the ability of what really is the decline of critical thinking in our society. We all want to think ourselves smart, and we are. So I don't want anyone to take anything ever personal. What I say is usually a lot of large generalizations based on, of course, my research. I'm an academic at heart. I am an analyst by trade. And so couple that together. I want to give us all that thought process as we go through, that this is information that is supported. We know, based on a lot of different factors in this world, that we are in a decline of the capability to think critically. And so I need to kind of go back in time and give you a little bit of a history lesson. J.D. Rockefeller in, was it 1906, actually was one of the founding individuals who had the want to rule the world. He didn't want to rule the world as in a dictator or a president. He wanted to rule the world as a puppeteer. Knowing that at the time he was, of course, the richest person in the world, he set out a plan. And his plan actually was to keep you and I always under the thumb of money, right? We had to work. So we look at the education system. These are different things that we have to look at. And one of them, of course, is the education system. And why is this not going forward? There we go. Okay. So in looking at this from the 19th century, late 19th century, earliest 20th century, education was on the rise. Women outside of the house, it was gaining steam, right? Women's suffrage and such. And education was a privilege, right? It was a complete privilege. And it was only meant for the upper crust of society, the very rich, to be educated. And that's exactly what they set out to enslave you and I. How could they do that? By taking away your critical thinking abilities. But then to explain, there are opposite effects in opposition to that. That, yes, our education system, we became more educated. They made that everybody had to go to school. But there's a reason that you had to be on time, that they had uniforms, that the desks were all in rows. That was because that was part of the indoctrination of follow what is order and discipline. It is, again, part of that mind craft, if you will, of ensuring that people just are, well, they're sheeple, really, okay? It wasn't about really critical thinking and decision making. They still had to placate the people. You did have driving forces from the 1930s through the 1960s that taught philosophy. Philosophy, regardless of whether, what school of thought you have, philosophy can be dry, it can be boring. It's a lot of, especially if you're trying to read Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, some of that Greek philosophy is it's been translated from Old Greek, which is not the same necessarily as the current Greek language, but it's been translated, retranslated, so on and so forth. So they don't get to tell you a lot about society, in that you don't get to learn what it is that they were up against. When you look at Plato having to drink hemlock, and that he was pretty much made to kill himself because, as a free thinker, the powers that wanted to stay in power, they don't want people to think, and we still have this to today. And then in order to do better jobs, everybody keeps, bosses and leaders, and, well, you have to think better, you have to think smarter. We have these tools that you can gather and use. We really do live, in an age of information. It's abundance. But do you truly know people who are the sage, the wisdom? When we look at the word wisdom, that really comes from having both reason and logic and applying it, because that individual is usually the one that made a lot of mistakes, right? That's how they gain that wisdom is, okay, they may have not led to the best decisions. Their reasoning may have not been the greatest. Even the logic applied may have not been applied in a principle that... Hold on. Hey, Ziggy, off. So when we look at putting those together, that's what ultimately comes out as wisdom. And so we look at critical thinking now at a place in time that we have forces like TikTok and Instagram, and everybody has the ability to say what they want to say. And that's well and fine. But does that mean that it's being said with logic, with reasoning? Are they actually putting together wisdom? The information that one person gets, their perspective. A lot of people that I talk to out, even students and just generalized individuals, even out on a lot of these social media platforms, will spout off very quick with, "You're wrong," or they get upset. And it's just like, well, okay, one, you're becoming emotional. Critical thinking, you need to try to get a lot of the emotion out. And I know that's what we talked about on Saturday and what we talked about last week. But we cannot reiterate as much that we can't just stop there and say, okay, well, emotion has to play some part, because you wouldn't care. Yes, you have to have empathy. Having empathy is very different than really kind of getting in there and wanting to argue. Arguments really come from a different place, and we never win in an argument. The best you can do against an individual who wants to argue is just literally listen to them. And you will start to hear a lot of inaccuracies, especially in their reasoning. Then if you start to say, well, what's the decision here? You're trying to persuade me. What's the decision? And that's where everything will start to fall apart. You become the quintessential critical thinker. You don't even have to actually come out with a decision or a judgment yourself. And how do we do this? Well, there's a lot of disciplining of our questioning. There's applied logic, which we'll go into, and even the ability to self-reflect. How many times do we know that we don't self-reflect? We can say, okay, well, those weren't the best questions, or maybe I didn't apply the logic the way I should have. That's still not the reflection that we need. We need to go, okay, can we go back over that discussion? And this is where within business, in trying to either persuade someone to believe in you and your plan, is it the reflection of their questions that maybe do expose gaps in knowledge? Rather than just saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about, so therefore you should just listen to me. Anytime that we have questions from other individuals, because they come from a different place of viewing. And that is a significant part of our critical thinking aspect. And as we go through the next, 15 weeks, 14, 15 weeks, we will start applying things like understanding fallacies, right? Fallacies. Does anybody know what a fallacy is? Just off the top of your head. Anybody have an idea?
A non-truth?
Yes. Oh, I love that. It's because individuals will have argumentation that really starts from a premise that is false. And there's like 18 categories of fallacies. And one of them is like a fallacy of confirmation bias, right? That it's, well, I can give you all the information that I have and I know it's a fact. Are all facts true, or all truths facts? Does anybody know the difference? Anybody? Okay. So
Facts are proven, maybe?
say that again?
Facts are proven?
Yes. So facts are actually something that are tangible that you can fall back on. Facts don't always actually, truths don't always have to be factual. When we say, because a truth is actually very subjective to an individual. What my truth is may not necessarily be your truth. But if I'm saying that, today is the, what's the date? The 10th of November 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, that is a fact, right? As we know it right now. But if I were to say, well, today is October, or 10th of November 2025 on the Julian calendar, well, it's not. The Julian calendar will have a different date. But it's not to say that the fact is that the Julian calendar actually is true and factual, but with what I'm trying to state, coming from that premise is a fallacy. It's coming from the wrong argumentation. And there's different ones. And we'll learn that because it's important that you, as a critical thinker, even in just our everyday life, especially if we're dealing with, if we're dealing with like car loans or financial loans, and they try to say, okay, here's the accountant or the salesperson tries to get us to do something, and we're just like, I really need to think about this. Is this the best choice, or is this the best decision or judgment for me to do? Especially when we use the adage of, we come to that fork in the road. It just doesn't have to be a left or a right. It could be left, right, left, middle, right middle. It could have, many different paths. It's just we have to start thinking about when someone has has our ear and is able to give us information. Yeah, do you want to take that information and do you want to process it? What was their agenda? What was their perspective? We ever get bad advice from people? Yeah, we do. When I say, without critical thinking, democracy, innovation, and integrity really do weaken, it does. Look at us today. Look at what for 40 days we had with this government shutdown. And again, not playing politics, but both sides very much lost integrity, because was everything being said truthful and factual? That's all to be, of course, looked at by the individuals. What was truthful? What was factual? And of course, ultimately, this is why I, for my own personal, do not believe politicians with what they say, is because, their integrity is weakened. And having been in the Washington, D.C. Beltway, gosh, for almost 20 years and doing my job, really did meet a lot of politicians, a lot of staffers, and nothing, I would say, was ever really, everything always had an agenda. And so therefore, with that agenda, well, I couldn't trust anything coming out of anyone's mouth. And that is part of what I want you to be able to learn is, okay, what can and can I trust? What is and is not factual? Because we live in a world heavy on misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. And that is also a big sign of the last 20, 25 years. The end of the Cold War in the late 80s, early 90s brought about the early to late 90s was an ambiguous time of we didn't know who was our primary enemy. The USSR went away. It ended up, opening really a vacuum of who is now the greatest enemy. We really didn't look at it in terms of saying, here is a time for utopian, peaceful society. It was whole governments around the world jockeyed for a position of world leader. And with that, either had sown discontent, violence. So we still had, we had a decline in terrorism of all things in the 1990s. But then who really filled that vacuum quickly was things like Al-Qaeda. But with that as well, the fall of the Soviet Union opened up the world to globalism. You couple that with the advent and the release in 1991 of the internet. You still had globalists based off of the history lesson of J.D. Rockefeller saying, okay, genie's out of the bottle, information is abound, information can get out there. They couldn't really control the newspapers, the media, and that's why over the last 25, 30 years we've seen conglomerates and individuals with political bias really gathering up a lot of the media, the multimedia companies. It was still to pursue an agenda, control information. This is where they don't want critical thinkers. We got rid of philosophy in public schools in the late 1960s, early 1970s. That was a significant part of curriculum to teach people to think. Even we get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they too got rid of a lot of philosophy, mandatory philosophy courses. So you've seen a decline over the last 20, 30 years of even the individuals coming out of those higher learning education institutions. But then you also have the explosion of the online universities. You would expect that, well, critical thinking would have not been controlled, but it is. Because then you got to ask yourself, well, who is really controlling the accreditation? There's only 6 accrediting bodies for higher learning institutions. And those still have very specific guidelines of what should and should not be taught. So I'm not here to say that degrees aren't worth it. I'm also here to say that degrees are worth it. Because while I have, say, an advanced degree, and many of you have advanced degrees, that's not to mean that individuals without it don't have higher educations than individuals with actual degrees. Because that is the internet. Now you look at cybersecurity or even the cyber realm, look at all this information that we have at our fingertips with even AI. It's smarter. AI now has the education level of a PhD, if not more. I could use it to actually have a debate on research and it would outsmart me. But that doesn't mean that I can't think more critically because of using that. And that's where I really do want individuals to understand. You have an emotional reasoning that replaces logic. And again, done by design. Look at the way TikTok and Instagram, their algorithms are meant to keep you scrolling, right? We get on these phones and that's all we're doing. And you see individuals who literally, I swear, their screen time has to be out of a 24-hour period, probably 20 hours. But that is a significant part. We've seen social media take a significant part of our logic and replace it with emotional reasoning rather than logical reasoning. And yes, logic can actually be part of mathematics. When you get into reading about critical thinking, especially some of the factual, like observational, practical, factual reason or logic. Guess what? There's actually mathematical equations that you could put together that show what is logic. And of course, we know logic is mathematically based. So when we know social media and our world are echo chambers. It's all about the cherry picking of information. How many of you know somebody, or even it could be yourself, that when you get in the frame of mind that we are in a debate and I've got to be right, and it's okay, we're in this together, that we can say, okay, well, I want to say that I'm right, you're wrong. We get into that frame of mind. I want you to kind of be more free and say to yourself, and be honest with yourself. You can be honest with us. We're going to get to know each other. That you will discount information that proves you wrong. Yet you will want information that proves you right. Right? You're especially say if it's an argument within a family, it's an argument with a teenager. Those are the worst. When I mean that, like today, I taught this afternoon. I teach at a high school, so my students are, the youngest is actually 15, and I have 16 students total between 2 classes, and the oldest is 18. And when I have discussions with them, they come up with some pretty good arguments. So it's, yeah, it is. It's arguments of when someone wants to be right, they'll only pick information that really solidifies and puts them in that frame of mind that they are the one that's correct. And even when someone can say, well, that's the truth, okay, can you show me the facts that support that truth? Then that's, things can actually fall apart, because there sometimes can be the truth, as I said, are subjective by the person. But you can both, as long as you're both talking and discussing, that is part of critical thinking on both of you. Hearing, the listening, the being open and compromising, because words have consequences. And if you can agree on that, okay, I'll agree with you that this is a fact. Great. Okay, so let's move on to an argument, to a different part of the argument. So when we look at the education factors, yeah, in saying that you can see all sides and you want to get deeper researching on it, you know, individuals, when we'll even get to talking about later near the end, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, having conversations with individuals that you know are incorrect. They're incorrect, or it doesn't make sense, and you don't want to come off confrontational or adversarial. There are tools and techniques to use to diffuse or de-escalate, in that you want to be able to still keep a conversation very civil, especially in a family or even a business sense. Being able to say, okay, I hear you. It's very interesting. There's phrases that, and I'll start putting together each week some gouges for you. I call them gouges, cheat sheets. Things that you can take just as little bits and pieces, nothing big, and they might even be just small bullet points to reinforce some of the things that we're talking about and to move forward with it, that you can apply. Because that will just show you how to improve your abilities to be a deeper thinker. And I love that word, deeper researching, because research is a significant part as well of critical thinking. It doesn't have to be that you're just like, okay, well, I just need to have time to research what you're saying. You can say, it's interesting, I hear you, I don't know much on that subject. I'd be willing to hear you out on that more, but look at the time, I have to get going. It's something to that effect. But taking down that, and even taking somebody up on any time that they want to offer some kind of extra information, is always something that's nice as well. So when we look at educational favors, memorization over inquiry, this is exactly where education went over really 120 years, since Rockefeller kind of laid out the plan of really keeping individuals enslaved, with just how to have a society that is nothing more than accept it. You go to work Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. You have a boss. You listen. You don't get fired. You think about individuals from the early 1900s, even through even my father's generation, very loyal to companies, worked in a company for 20, 30, 40 years. The military is quintessential as this focus of regimen that, you become a lifer, you stay in 20, 30, 40 years. The routine, that routine really just, they don't want people to think outside the box. Now you have that capability. That's the reason I think that just talking about the topic of critical thinking and what that means is really significant. Because yes, root memorization, didn't we do that all the way, they had you memorize the continents and the ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s, but they never really sat and said, let's try to solve the world's problems. We have a class on that. Let's solve the world's problems by having individuals sit and think. No, they really don't. No one ever really thinks about having just that. Let's sit. More schools, though, utilizing AI are bringing some of that back. I know here in Austin, Texas, they have an academy called the Austin Academy that utilizes AI. but also so they do it for 2 hours a day of intensive instruction using an integrated curriculum that is AI driven, meaning they don't have teachers. The curriculum is all within the computer. That's an intensive 2 hours. The rest of the day is on idea to concept and model. So these K through 8th grade, doesn't go through high school, K through 8th grade, these children come up with a concept and then have to actually build upon that concept. It's part of the STEM. They're breaking that mold of they're going to utilize tools. They want to get away from the rote memorization and have individuals of inquiry. This is why we're all here. I want you to start questioning things and then really looking them up and doing the research. Like, what are fallacies? What are the different kind of fallacies? How can you get away from ensuring that you don't have a lot of fallacies? We won't have tests in this class. I want you to be able to learn how to really captivate your own mind. Learn how to not overanalyze or get lost. We used to say, let's take notes and let's plan out our day. And then, of course, you have like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Those were great books 20, 30 years ago. Now with AI and now with, of course, our electronic usage, we are a lot more intense with our brains are now wired to be entertained. The lights, the screens, when we say get off the screen, I too have a very difficult time sometimes getting back to my books. I mean, I love my books, and a lot of times I think I've got my bookshelves full of books. And yes, I've read about 80% of those, 80% over a lifetime. And I just keep buying more. And my wife says, no more. But I take that as a direct part of my critical thinking. I grew up in a household, not too many books. I grew up in a household of a working, blue collar father, carpenter, and it was always about hard work, never idle hands. So you were cleaning, you were doing something outside, but never saying, okay, then sit down and read a book. That was probably not until I got into my profession and I had some good mentors. But that's where I think the information overload really started to take effect of, well, what do I read? What priorities do I give? And then, of course, that all fell apart by the time our smartphones hit. And as my children were growing up, I also said, no, I want you to start reading. So books, and even myself, I fell into that and went, okay, fine, I'm going to read more. So when we look at that standardized testing, Kendra, I know, put in there the speedy tests. Yep. That's why some districts, some schoolings are getting rid of some of the standardized testing. It's not really an accurate reflection of what the individuals have learned, especially these days. AI is actually changing the way we think, and I think if it's applied correctly, it will significantly help you because it can actually help us as critical thinkers to put in a problem that we're faced with and say, help me get through this dilemma. What are my possibilities? It's kind of a sounding board. Again, they do hallucinate, meaning it still comes up with false truths. It just will make something up, although it is getting better. You have to watch for that, what they call digital misinformation. But it outpaces our verification as well. We can have so much information available to us, and that's what the internet did after 1991. That's exactly what it did. Was it outpaced the verification? Look at what Wikipedia did. It got to the point that it was full of falsities. And how did, a great concept, but not judged in the right way to go forward. Where do you see your cognitive bias as an individual? Are you really self-aware of when we say biases, it can be as simple as what you like, what you don't like. But saying, well, okay, I don't like scones, but I love croissants. Well, someone can say, well, you're a bias against scones. Well, you're right. Is there a reason that you don't like scones? See, you're asking questions. I know these are really low level, but unless someone comes up with a topic that we want to discuss, which we can, because that's another way to learn and be able to identify, well, that premise is incorrect, or you're coming from a different perspective. This is why I love and hate politics. As we know, whether you are a left or a right, whether you like this person or hate that person, we're allowed to. That is part of the free thinking, right? So we have biases. Why? Why do we? I could say I don't like somebody just because they're somebody. It doesn't even have to be any of, what we would say is age, race, religion, I would just say, it's just something. I don't care for the person. We have that. We can say that. I said that about a lot of my professors going through my journeys of education. And there's some of them that I've actually ended up liking after I no longer was their student. Was that a bias? Yep. Because they were teaching me on subjects that maybe I thought I knew more on. That was my own bias. But was I cognitive? Did I understand the metacognitive aspects? And that's that frame of mind. Do we know? Do you do that? Do you ever really know, well, this bias really starts to distort my judgment? Anybody fall into that? You can either chime in or... Again, these are kind of talking points that if I hit a nerve on something that someone wants to talk about, by all means, we can start to really dive into it. But that's where we start to really look at news. News used to say that the taglines were always, if it bleeds, it leads. We got rid of that soon after 9/11 because the agenda stopped. What were the atrocities? Well, they were the beheadings were the big ones. YouTube, people would be able to upload beheading videos. Grotesque, right? You could only then, after pretty much about 2005, you could only get videos on the dark web, the deep web. And that was only at its infancy. But there was sensationalism to a lot of things that started to cross the line, that they started to see that it wasn't necessarily, it was moving the needle against controlling the society. Because if you started to really move it to where people could be upset about, then they weren't going to support the government. So there was that, well, we went into Iraq. You think of the first Gulf War in 1990 and 91, and we stopped at a certain point against Saddam Hussein, right? And Monday morning quarterbacking even of Bush 41 was that, well, we should have gone all the way into Baghdad back then. Well, no. Why? Because there wasn't a lot of social media control. But after 9/11, and by the time we went into Iraq in 2003, you had cell phones, you had smartphones, you had Facebook. Well, even MySpace was going away a little bit. and then you had Snapchat, and you started kind of seeing those as it was sensational media really was the reward. And then there was that overreaction. Critical thinking allows us to stop that overanalyzation of information and gets us back to where we need to be thinking. So, Jay, not to get political, but an example I can give for myself is the current state of immigration in the U.S. As a first-gen American, I can sympathize with undocumented immigration and them not wanting to get deported, and then I'm opposed to the forced separations of families. But as an American, looking at it with a different perspective, you said I can also understand the logic behind deportations and how it could benefit Americans. See, that is, I think, a very good argument in not the adversarial use of the word argument, but in a critical thinking aspect. You were able to lay out. See, this is where, I mean, it's perfect that I say, words have consequences. Consequences that, yes, we're talking about a topic that could be polarized, right? Polarized discourse. And that's, you're saying exactly what a lot of us already see and hear every day with this very topic of immigration and the state of immigration in the U.S. And then, yes, you can say different perspectives. Can you see different? Do you have to? And this is where I say, as a critical thinker, you don't have to actually stay on on one side or the other of a topic, of an argument. You don't have to. You can remain that, the jury is out, because we do, as humans, we have compassion, we have empathy, we have sympathy, and you can go through those, and I know that those are emotional, but you can utilize those as part of your thinking, in the fact that, yes, you have covered where now, can other people articulate that? I would say a large part of our population around the world has a very difficult time putting together a debate and having that debate be for, against, and saying, I can see one side or the other. Now, here's where you have to start to kind of go, okay, what is a possible solution? That's where you can start getting into, well, we do have weak problem-solving skills. We have almost no problem-solving skills as a society. As we can draw on, everybody gets a platform on social media to talk about topics like immigration, and they just get to say in their heated moment on a video, no one ever goes into a long diatribe, right, of trying to cover all the bases and saying, I can see this, I can see that, here's why I see this, here's why I see that, but what's the answer? We don't actually, critical thinking doesn't always have to come up with an actual answer. The decision can be left somewhat, I don't want to say ambiguous, but is a decision that can lead to more questions. Same thing with judgments. You make a judgment for or against, but does that mean that it is concrete at that moment? No. Waiting for new information, different perspectives, so on and so forth. And when we get legislators together, and if they truly were for their constituents, trying to get 435, as it stands in our Congress, to agree on a judge, I just don't think, we're so polarized. That's that polarized discourse. Do we have tribal thinking? Yes. We're never going to, I don't think we're going to get rid of anything like tribal thinking. And we have a significant amount of erosion of trust, both in what we call experts and institutions. One only has to look over the last 5 years, from the COVID pandemic, the locking up of people, the jabs, regardless whether you are pro or anti-vax. There was a lot of institutional, and as we find out later, institutions and experts that we trusted to find out what they did and what they didn't do. Now we have a lack of trust. And again, that goes in directly the attack on critical thinking or lack of critical thinking skills. So that's why I say a society that cannot question itself will obey whoever shouts the loudest. I gotta say that's true. That if you can continue saying it over and over, the loudest, people begin to really believe it, and then they follow it. It's that, how do we break that cycle? And I want you to be able to question everything. We used to say, let's question authority. Punk rockers from the 1970s and the 80s, we used to say, question authority, question everything. But we kept being told, no, get back in line. Don't question what the teacher says. Don't question what, the older person has told you to do or not to do. There is something to be said to giving a latitude of being able to think. And I want to invite individuals to that revival of the Socratic questioning. I say in leadership and education, and really it's even beyond here. If you think I say something that you don't agree with, by all means, ask a question. Okay, how do you think that way? Why do you think that way? What proof do you have? Teaching media literacy is a civic defense. And I truly mean that. I have a huge distrust for any and all media. I don't say that I will fall into watching one news media outlet or the other, because you can box them all up and you can see who owns what media. A lot of times it's all just to play off one another. So really understanding how to see through what is misinformation, what's disinformation, what's propaganda. You get to then start to really foster your own lifelong learning, your intellectual humility. I put a series of Substack white papers out. I love writing. I have gotten away from it the last couple of weeks in writing for Substack, my Substack account. And I'm not sure if anybody's visited my Substack account, but I have a whole series on intellectual humility. Don't think of anybody who, you're all intellectuals just by virtue of being here and being open to learning. To me, that is part of being an intellectual. That humility is also knowing that you don't know everything. That was Aristotle. That said, you knowing that you know nothing is already part of knowing. And so I want you to start to build this mindset where if you are questioning even yourself, that's a positive. We only start to fail when we're not asking for data, when we're not asking the questions, we're just assuming, we're just placating. It's you have to tell yourself, and I think that's really good, Kendra, to be able to say, you have to start telling yourself, get out of your mindset. And then when people shut down because they're being questioned, it's a lot of it is psychology, that we as a society are not used to being questioned. I'll fall back to my high school students. I do a lot of Socratic method, and I put out the information. I ask a lot of questions, and boy, I watch the heads go down when I'm like, hey, so we just got done talking about XYZ. Who has something they want to tell us to expand upon? And then they just kind of all look around, and I'm like, wow, they start to really shut down. People will do that too. Sorry, I messed up on this. Frameworks, that I want us to introduce. This is this week is what I meant to say is, that Socratic method. I want you to start thinking and reading about the metacognition, bias awareness, and reflective practicing. How many of you journal? Anybody write journals? Yeah. Is that more cathartic for you? Like you do it because you for your own mental health, or do you do it to brainstorm and put out problems and again that you say, okay, here's what's happened and here are possible ideas, and you go back to it. I bought a whole set of this mind and it was really great, and I ended up stopping for a while. That it was made for men. They have them for women. They have them for teenagers as well, because we think very differently. Yeah, brainstorming. We're going to go into some of those, what they call structured analytical techniques. Writing is cathartic. It really helps, with our frame of mind. It can actually recenter us. And I think a lot of it could also be reflective, because it's just not putting it down, but it's also going back and reading it. I have journals that I wrote 10 and 15 years ago that I crack open every once in a while for that same thing of, it's a way to regroup. It's a way for me to go, did I get past this at that time? So I just kind of want you to be aware that journaling here for critical thinking aspects, while yes, could be therapeutic, it could be for the psychological reasons, it also is a significant part of critical thinking and analysis. That analysis starts to come in when we self-reflect and be able to go, well, why did I write that down? Why didn't I write this down? Oh, here was a piece at that time I didn't know this information. Now that I put this information along with that, that's the reason I did it. Or I would do it differently now. So I want you to dive into the book even more, dive into more research as we go through. This week, of course, we have assignment 1. I want you to read all of chapter 1. They're short, right? You have assignments, you have a discussion. The discussion prompt is that we talk about, does technology strengthen or weaken independent thought? That's the word I want you to focus on. We already know that does technology, whether it's adverse or it's a positive, depending on your own take. It's that independent thought. If we say, does it have a positive, negative, strength or weakness, independent thought, after reflecting on it for years about technology, and when I say technology, it's broad. I can say it's computers, it's phones, but I could also say it's the internet, it's apps, it is technology like no longer reading books, it's Audible, right? Does Audible stop me from learning? People will say, well, listening to Audible, I get to hear a whole book while I'm on a commute. Yes, but does your brain actually, is it forming an analysis of what you're reading or what it's reading to you by seeing the words and having to think and process? That's that metacognitive and that cognitive abilities. No, we're not. We're not really meant to multitask. When people say, well, I can multitask. you're not getting to actually fully focus. And I'm one person who's talking. I've got 4 or 5 screens going on right now. Luckily, you're focused. You're my focus. I'm looking at the PowerPoint and I'm looking at me at the camera as I talk. So I'm looking at you. But when we start to look at ourselves as independent thinkers, do we see that technology is in the way, or does it help us? Then the assignment is just a quick, easy 2-pager. I even say double space, APA. I just want it something that I can read. So where do you see critical thinking failures today? We talked a lot about it, but I want to hear you. And it's okay if you're just like, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen and pick one of the things that I talked about, but feel free to kind of bring up anything, because I'm going to bring up, and I won't, it'll be anonymous, but I'll be able to bring up, as these assignments are written, some of the things that you say and integrate them into the next lessons. That, okay, somebody did bring up XYZ as, where they, without a name, saw critical thinking as a failure today. Yes, the deadline. Sorry, I was thinking about discussion boards, but we don't really have hard and fast that Seth has put out. So I would say if we have discussion boards that we can post back and forth, try to have your initial post to that discussion prompt by Thursday night. And then any replies, I'll get in there and start replying to people and asking questions. Again, I love alternative analysis and questioning to kind of further the discussions. You have until like Sunday night. No, there's no late points. Matter of fact, I don't think that we have pretty much any late policy. But, if there is anything that you need, let me know. So, big takeaways. Critical thinking is a discipline. It's not a talent. Look under, this is where I was just like, it's under it's where the announcements are all at. And I think I already have the discussion for week 1 in there. I put out like my original welcome announcement and such. So as soon as, so you should be able to see it there. And I know that Seth was working on putting that stuff together earlier today, that you might see it pop up in the assignments area. Like I said, this is nothing hard and fast, because I want discussions to keep going even after that week. To me, it's a, pass-fail type. Yeah, on the sidebar of the LMS, you'll see the tab on the discussion boards. I want it to be an ongoing, I would love to see discussions from week 1. So the replays, what I will do is, this is recorded. I will, once it processes, I upload it to my YouTube, and then I will have the URL to the YouTube, where in the Professor Cortex, you should see a box that says what do you call it? After class videos. So then you can go review those. And I'm going to give you the QR code here in 1 second. But yeah, society, how it rewards speed over accuracy, and how do we change that, or why should we change that? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that? Awareness of bias. So with that, next week we'll start talking about more philosophy and rational inquiry. Yes, I get a little bit more into Plato. Plato. Oh my gosh, I was thinking about my grandson in that 2 seconds, and I said Plato. What they call his apology. So I know, Plato. So I can laugh at myself. The Socratic dialogue and ethical reasoning, some of this stuff might sound like, whoa, way over here. I try to get it down here so we can all talk about it. It is, at least if you are understanding and it resonates with you, and just gets you to think, and you can go, okay, I'm going to look a little bit of that up. That actually you'll start to see some of your own thinking changing. There's the URL if you haven't gotten the book yet. My motto: think deeper, think smarter, or live smarter. If you need my email address, there it is as well. And so I'm going to stop sharing for this moment and bring up the QR code here in 1 second. I'm going to share again. Hold on. Let me share this window. There we go. Okay. Do you see the QR code?
No, you're kind of. Oh no.
Oh, geez. Okay. Here is, hold on. There's, I know at least the, in the chat, I just put the other one. Let me do this. Yeah, it won't let me share that screen. That's interesting. Let's try it again. Let's try something else. Hold on. There we go. Now, is it going to let me? Okay. Hold on. We're gonna get this. And as the time goes by, it'll get smoother to do this over and easier. So